I'm Jay. I'm one of the founders over at Inguardians, and I'm really happy to be here. I have a quick little bio slide, and that's what I look like maybe on a good day. And then I have what I think of as my graphical bio, and it's because I think nobody reads bio slides. They're just easy text, so I've made mine. These are things that I've done are important to me. Thank you for talking about Bastille Linux. That was kind of one of the that was early at the start of my career, and I really loved working on it. So I want to talk to you about. Um, I want to talk a little bit about physical security, and I just want to talk about penetration testing in general. So the first thing is, you know, I think we're here because we want to raise awareness and talk about penetration testing. We want to talk about how physical security fits into that. We want to talk about how we do this safely, and we just want to raise awareness. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So first, physical security is actually a really integral part of information security. In our field, we have a total bias at looking at digital. We're like, what can I see on the wire? What can I see on the wire? And you're like, man, if you can, you're like, I've been trying to get it. I've been trying to break into this company, that's hired us to break into them. I've been trying to penetrate their network perimeter for, a week, and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not getting anywhere. It's like, well, how about if we just walk into their office's front reception area and, cause a little distraction and plug into that open network jack and leave a little box behind leave a little computer behind that'll connect back to us on cell phone. Does that get us anywhere? Oh, right. Like, and we do this countless times in a year where that's what we're doing. We just gain the smallest amount of physical access, and that gives us the kind of access that we weren't getting from outside, or that is difficult to get without including that vector. But as soon as you spend 5 minutes in that interaction, and of course the week you spend preparing for it, you end up getting network access. So physical security testing is not new. Members of our management team have actually been testing physical security since 1984. That's a long time ago because I was pretty young then. So my career itself began back in 1999, and I was focused on defensive security. So I was a big hardening guy. I wrote I wrote articles on locking down systems, and I wrote a Bastille Linux and the first CIS benchmark and a testing tool for them, and so on. So I was really focused on, well, I just want to lock everything down. I want to go around to every single computer, and I want to change its configuration, make it much harder to break into, and I want to spend that was my focus. And around, right around then, I started working with Ed Scotus, and this was before Intel Guardians or Inguardians started. And Ed and I did a number of engagements. We did some really fun work that was sitting down and looking at long firewall rule sets that were printed out and spanned 66 pages. And we did all kinds of conversation with clients, our security architecture review, and we did some penetration testing. And as time went on quickly, we started doing more and more penetration testing. Like at the start, the customers were coming to us asking for penetration testing about half the time, and they were asking for other services the other half the time. And I felt kind of frustrated. I wanted to get to do more of my proactive hardening stuff. Later on, as we formed Inguardians or Intel Guardians, Mike Poor was coming at this too. Mike Poor's an IDS and IPS guy. At the time, it was IDS, and he was wondering, why aren't the clients coming to us more often and saying, can you tune my IDS? Can you make my IDS more effective? Can you train my can you help train my team? And we got a good bit of those things that we wanted, but we got a ton of penetration testing. And I was frustrated at first, but eventually I realized that why the customers wanted penetration tests so often. And it wasn't about the, cool story, a whole bunch of guys in hoodies. I don't think we've ever worn hoodies, but a whole bunch of guys in hoodies, were looking at our network in the middle of the night drinking Red Bull or, okay, we were drinking Red Bull. It wasn't about that cool story. That cool story was Cool stories, of course, are a pretty neat part of penetration testing work, but it's that the penetration test actually trying to compromise a network, actually trying to simulate what the bad actors will do, provided some benefits that hardening only couldn't. So what kind of benefits? So first, the big one is like there are all these things you can do. I talked about like I'm going to look at a system. I've got 65 things I can do. If you've ever looked at a DISA STIG or even the CIS benchmarks, the set of things on those checklists. I know on the CIS work, like we worked really hard to prune down from the all of the things large list, and yet when you come down to it, you end up with these lists of yes, these are the things that you should do. You should do it every system, and it is 60, 70 things, and you'll never get them all done, or it will take a long time to get them all done. So if you are committed to getting all of those proactive things you can do done, and if that is realistic, it's going to take you quite a while. So for the first so many months, you're only going to get the benefit of the first 2 or 3 or 5 things. And so you need prioritization if you're going to get anywhere. Like as a defender, it can't be, you don't want to say when you get compromised, you don't want to say, oh, well, we were going to harden that, or we were going to fix that hole. It was on the schedule for a year from now. You want smart prioritization and penetration testing, actually going and trying to break in and finding how you did it and what you found. That gives you a real clear picture of what you should hit first. What else does pen testing do that kind of just the straight defensive proactive hardening doesn't do for you? It helps you find out which findings can get chained together to give access, even when individual findings wouldn't. The way I think about this is I talk to a lot of companies that say, we have this, we have scoring on our vulnerabilities, and anything that comes in at a 9 or above, we definitely get on. If it comes in at 9.5, we'll wake somebody up or what have you. If it comes in below an 8, we're not, it's probably never going to get done. And the hard part is that means as attackers in a penetration test where we get to go deeper than just, looking at each vulnerability independently of the whole situation, is that, we can take 2 mediums, we can take two of those lower, medium severity findings and turn those 2 combined into breaking in. And getting that view and understanding where that's going to happen, that's something, honestly, that you get out of actually doing the attack and not just talking about it. Other things penetration testing does that proactive hardening wouldn't do would be like finding out whether the compensating controls that you've got are actually effective. Like, do they actually compensate for your inability for the political or technical inability to do something? Like, let's test it. Let's find out how well that works. And I'll add something that's not on the slide in that way here. I'm actually at a different conference right now, and I was talking about a security audit, and what it found was that there was a vulnerability in Kubernetes, and Kubernetes fixed the vulnerability. Then we had a code audit. We had this kind of like attack the code by way of fuzzing it and so on. And it turned out that the fix for the vulnerability was defective. And honestly, sometimes the only way that you actually find out whether whatever you've done actually achieved the result you wanted is to test it. And that's where penetration testing is great. So the last one is the story. It's that you end up getting to make a more convincing argument for addressing those vulnerabilities that you found. So there's the like if you've been on the defender side, you've said, listen, for years I've been telling you that you've got to do this thing. I've been and someone's saying, yeah, but nobody would ever use that. Nobody would ever use that vulnerability. Nobody could ever use that vulnerability. It'd be too hard. And so, honestly, you get an attacking team to try it out, and they show you that they could, and they show you that if they use that vulnerability, they end up at the end of the day with whatever the crown jewels are, whether those are the hidden financials in a private company or the formula for something at Coca-Cola or what have you. I'm just making something up. You find they can get to that. I have 2 stories here. So one is we were doing something that wasn't a penetration test. This was Mike Poor and Ed Scotus and I, early days of Inguardians now. And we were talking to a client, and we're with the client, and we're doing an architecture review. And the client said, "Oh no, like I'm using this SSL gateway, and if I take my computer and I log in through that gateway, it doesn't matter if my computer's compromised. I'm protected. No one can get at my keystrokes or what have you." And the reason he was saying this was he was saying that like he uses the kiosks that are available in hotels and conferences all the time to go and check his corporate email and do all kinds of things within his company, manage the networks and so on. And we were a little horrified by that. And we said, "I tell you what, we're going to set up our own little kiosk, and you log into that it's that SSL gateway, and and let's see if we can get your keystrokes." And so we set it up. We set up our own kiosk. We didn't surround it with a beautiful cardboard box or whatever, and he used it, and we showed him, and he'd bet that he would give us iPods. And this is back when people sold iPods. And damn it, I never got my iPod. Mike has gotten over that, but I still haven't. I still want my iPod. It's been 10 years, and I want that iPod. It's probably a $5 on eBay, but anyway, the other one for us is we were at a client and they said, "Oh no, don't worry." This is a long time ago, obviously. They said, "Don't worry, we don't have Wi-Fi in our office." And this one is my business partner Bob Hillary's story. And he said, "Well, let's just check that out." And he pulls out his network stumbler and says, "You've got Wi-Fi. Actually, it's really, really close to where we are right now." And he found that the person who was saying that they didn't have Wi-Fi at that office actually was sharing the wired network out on wireless. He was bridging an open access point from his laptop onto the company's wired network. So they had Wi-Fi. They just didn't know it. But it was kind of funny, the person saying they didn't have it was the person who was providing it without realizing it. So I want to kind of stop some of the tech talk and just talk about, like, why do we fear being tested? There are a good number of people in companies that are definitely afraid of a penetration test, or at least that's the way it was, a lot more, 10 and 15 years ago. We'd have clients who were, we'd have people at our client company who were just really nervous. I remember one I was doing, and the information security guy was doing this on site, and the information security guy wanted to watch everything I did. And part of that was that he was just really, really nervous we were going to find something, and that was going to be bad for his career. And we don't tend to have those kind of conversations anymore. Penetration testing's gotten pretty mature, and so people know that this is, that people accept that penetration testing is part of what companies do. Heck, it's mandated. It's mandated in standards and auditing frameworks and so on now. So the important thing is, if you think about it, making someone look bad isn't really the intent of a penetration test, as much as that's what we might be afraid of. The goal is actually to improve the situation, not to measure it and lay blame. One of the easiest ways I think about this is I think about phishing work that we've done. If you think about the phishing work you've done, if you're in our field, you send a phishing email to the entire organization, and in most organizations, you're going to get a few people clicking. If the organization hasn't had much awareness training or what have you, or hasn't had a bad experience, the number of people who will click some link in an email or even enter their password or download an executable and run it is a lot higher than once the organizations had started doing their own awareness training. But even once they have, you'll still probably have a couple people click. And the goal then isn't to go and find those people and read them the riot act and blame them and shame them. Because at the end of the day, hardening them against social engineering isn't really that's the company's job. And the company only, if you've had to create those social awareness campaigns, you've talked to people who have, you only get a few minutes with each person. Like maybe maybe you're lucky and you get 30 minutes of giving them some awareness training. Maybe you get more, but in most situations, you're trying to get you're fighting to get just a few minutes minimum of time to talk to them, to talk to somebody or get them to watch a video and stay engaged. That helps harden them against phishing. So you do a phishing campaign and a few people click, and then you choose the customers tend to choose. But they might go to just those people. They might go to everybody and just say, listen, so some people clicked. Here's when we talked to them, the kind of experiences we had, and things get better. And one of the cool things, honestly, there, and I apologize if there's sirens in the background. One of the things that happens actually for us is that we realize we're not just hardening people. Like when you're doing phishing work with a company, you're not just hardening individual people against phishing. You're actually hardening the entire organization, because if any of you have ever sent a phishing campaign where you send a phishing email to say everybody at the company, and you decide you're going to try to go low and slow and send 5 or 10 or 20 at a time, and then wait a half hour, you realize that in the beginning, like you catch a few people, but once you've been going for a little while, you don't catch anybody. And the reason is that somebody starts speaking up. Somebody says, hey, I saw this, and they report it either up or they report it around. I mean, I've had the experience where we phished a company, we did it low and slow because that was what our client was asking us to do. And it turned out everybody sat in one big building, two-story building that looked like the largest aircraft hangar that you've ever seen. And so like word spread like wildfire on that open floor plan office. And so we got, our numbers, the number of people who got hit who were successfully fooled was way lower. And so that's kind of the point. The point in social engineering testing is to harden the organization. The point in penetration testing is to harden the organization. We're not trying to ding anybody. You're not trying to get anybody in trouble. You're trying to actually raise the organization's entire capability. The other story I like to tell every now and then is, I talk to a client. I'm like, listen, you're gonna have us do this 3 times. And the first time, if you've never had a penetration test before, you're going to be Swiss cheese. Like, we're going to break in, and it's not just that. It's going to be a really wide scale compromise, and it's going to go pretty quickly. And the second time, it's going to be a lot harder to break in. We're going to work at it. We're pretty good at this, and we're probably still going to find our way in. And that's great. The third time, if everything's going well and according to plan. Well, if everything's going according to plan, you'll have a fire truck going by. But if everything's going well and according to plan, then by the third time, we'll be, I'm going to have to be talking to one of our penetration testers, and I'm going to have to be talking him off the ledge. He's going to be saying, listen, maybe I'm not really good at computers. I've always liked working on cars. Maybe I should go join my uncle's, mechanics garage instead. And I'll be saying to him, no, this is the whole point of penetration testing is to figure out, is to make things stronger, and then make sure we have, and keep finding the little things that are going to happen. So I have one more story here it's kind of part of a longer story I like to tell sometimes, but I'm going to tell you the short version. I was on a physical security assessment, similar to what was happening in Iowa, and I had this point where I'd compromised the building. I'd been in lots and lots of places. I'd been challenged by people and been able to social engineer and I'm just trying to leave the building. And so I'm in this one hallway where I can open any door, and I know the general direction of getting out of the building, but I don't want to go out the way I came. And so I open a door and I walk into a room, and I walk halfway across the room, and I hear a click behind me. And that's the point when I realized this is the first door in the entire building that I haven't checked to make sure that it's not going to lock behind me when I go through. And so I go back and I see that door is locked behind me. And then, in a clear violation of fire codes, I go to the other door in the room, and that one's locked too. So I'm locked in this room. It's clearly a room that's like, this room's right off the lobby that I'm trying to get to. If I can just figure out how to either get back where I came from or get to that lobby, I'm home free. And there's some tables that are against the wall. There are some folding tables against the wall that the wall that I just came through with that door. And I walk over to the tables and I climb up on them. And I climbed up on them because there's a drop ceiling. So I'm pushing on the tiles of the drop ceiling. I'm a rock climber. I'm hoping that I can do strong enough pull up to go over. And I'm trying to see if the wall, try to see if the wall goes all the way up, or if I can just go through the ceiling tiles. And I'm starting to push on a ceiling tile, and I hear a voice behind me, and it says, "Can I help you there, son?" And I turn around and I do what I've been doing most of the time. I pull a business card out that I have for my client contact, and I say, "Oh, hi, I am," this was a bank, so let's just call it Goliath National Bank. So I turn around and say, "Hi, I'm in town from New York, from central office, and I'm doing some security reviews. So I'm just trying to see if these walls go all the way up, or if if a bad actor could climb over them." And the security guard says, "Well, you're kind of short. Why don't I help you out?" And he climbs up on the table and starts pushing on the ceiling tiles. And now I'm watching and thinking, "Oh God, I'm gonna get this security guard fired. Oh, what have I done? This guy he's an older guy, kind of reminds me of my grandpa. I gotta not get grandpa fired." And I climb down off the table and think about it for a second, and I say, "Okay, well, I feel confident. This is great. Why don't you escort me out?" And he escorts me out, and I go in the next day to do a run through with the client, and to talk about the experience, and the clients, and I said, "So one of the things that's really important to me is you need to not fire the security guard." They're like, "We weren't really thinking of firing the security guard, but why is it really important to you?" And I said, "Well, because now you have a security guard that's been through live fire training. You have a security guard who actually had a threat come in, and he got fooled, and now honestly, he should be the person who can tell an accurate story and say, this is what happened. So because of that, don't believe any hogwash anybody tells you. Like, make sure you're looking at their badge. Make sure that their badge opens a door. And heck, maybe go a little further and, call whoever it is that they say they're in town to meet, or call their direct supervisor. Like, don't use their phone, and so on. So this for me is the point of penetration testing, and it's not about getting people in trouble. It's about things getting stronger. So I don't know exactly how much time I have left. I think I'm probably right on track. But since I started early, Jason, you'll let me know, or John, you'll let me know if I'm going over. Well, okay, I'm going to keep going so I don't leave dead air. So the thing I want to talk about a little bit more is, if you're in our field, what we do to stay safe. And here's what can keep you out of safety, and that is the engagements that we're doing here. They're short enough. The delays in the start are really painful. Like, if your work, if the work you're doing for a client is a year long, and the client's not ready on day one, or you find some kind of hiccup on day one, that's not so bad. Like, you just, you're like, okay, so we're off schedule by 3 days maybe, but we have, but we'll make it up over time. When you have a 1 week engagement or a 2 week engagement, when you have engagements that are this short, you're really, really focused on avoiding a delay. Like, if you start a day late, it's a day people are sitting on their hands. It's also a day, given that those people are probably booked, onto something else the following week, or at the end of the engagement, they're booked on something else. You're realizing, oh gosh, we're gonna have to figure out how to make up the time. And it's much harder in a short project. So that gives penetration testing companies just this huge focus on trying to stay on schedule. And Jake talked earlier about, how much a client can get annoyed when you insist that any change in scope has to be in writing. And honestly, everybody can get annoyed. I'm one of the founders and so a manager over here at Inguardians, and we'll have, our own folks are annoyed that we have to stop and pause and get all of this written down, make sure that we're checking it, and make sure that we're talking to enough people about it. But it's really important to basically to slow down, to take a deep breath and say, okay, well, let's, that may cause a delay, and we may have to deal with that, and to stay careful. But the way you really try to protect the schedule and stay careful is basically starting to look for those things ahead of time. And that means that that when you're working, you have to train your own client. You have to ask your client questions they haven't thought of. You have to ask them you have to try to avoid the situations that might happen the day before the work starts, the day the work starts, where the client says, on a phishing campaign, it'll be that you've been working with this client, on the pretext you're going to be sending out, like they agreed to it a week ago, and then the day you're about to send that pretext, your client contact comes to you and says, oh, I just showed it to my boss today on a whim, and he said we can't send this at all. So you guys have to go back to the drawing board. We need a new pretext. You need to get new domains and new everything. And you realize, for me, that's where I realized, like, I have to ask my client ahead of time, like, are you talking to your boss about this? Are you sure that this is something that's going to be, are you sure that this is something that's going to be good for, that's going to be perceived well when it happens? And so for me, there are a number of kind of questions this brings up. One of the big ones is that Inguardians, we're really trying to focus hard on saying, as we're talking to each other individually, we don't say that we're talking to John. We say we're talking to John Strand. As we talk to each other, it makes hallway conversations or what have you longer by one word, but that one more word or a few more words, if we're smart enough to remember to add his title, like, it gives everybody a much clearer picture. Because the thing that I always worry about is hearing the client said they're okay with that, or the client asked us to do. And I'm saying, okay, you're saying your immediate client contact. Your immediate client contact is a director, or is somebody that reports up through a director. This thing's signed by an officer. Are we really sure that what the client just asked for is something that they're truly authorized to ask for? And so what we'll be doing is we'll be talking to the client, so we're trying to make sure that we understand, where does our client contact fit in the organization? That sounds so simple, but it's not that easy, because the first person who calls you from the client is, 5 people down from an officer. We're trying to ask them a lot of questions, and we're also trying to honestly negotiate and train them. So we're trying to train them, because we do tons of penetration tests. They're going to buy one a year, or some of our other clients have been, one every 3 years or what have you. So you really have to realize that while your client has the responsibility for getting everyone involved who should be involved or communicated with, it's also your responsibility to make sure that they can make the decisions involved in that well. So you're asking them, who have you talked about this with? Have you spoken with legal? Do you want to speak with legal? Have you spoken with HR? And often, like, a client is also tied to schedule, and they're like, oh, I don't really want to, that would slow us down. I'm like, listen, and that's where we as testers have to go and say, listen, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen some things go sideways. We have to talk to more people. They can keep as much of a secret or what have you as they need to, but we need to dial in the people who can decide who else to dial in. We need to dial in the people who will be the ones giving you a hard time if your judgment call was wrong. There's this last bullet I have here is actually really important to me, because I've seen something where the officer of the company said that they signed an agreement. That's, while the office of the company signed the agreement, it said that we were going to be, trying to defeat locks and so on. And the office of the company didn't really read the agreement over, or they didn't read it closely because it was summarized for them by somebody and they just signed on the dotted line. It's actually really important we make sure that whoever signed our contract understood what they were signing. And honestly, there's case law around that. I won't bring that up, but so I've hit my end of slides, but I'm just trying to think of a couple more things, or I want to talk about a couple more things that could be really useful here. The biggest one for me is this last part I'm talking about. Is this, like, we have to stay safe, to keep our people safe, to keep our employees safe. I'm a business owner. The nightmare scenario for me is that one of our employees gets arrested or gets hurt because we weren't careful enough. Even if it's that they weren't careful enough, it's important for me. And that's what keeps everybody here who's talked today, who owns the company. It's what keeps us up at night. It's the thing that, that's the worry. And so for me, that means we do have to be really careful, and we also have to realize that it's our job to train our client. It's our job to talk to our people. It's our job to really stop and make sure that we're being really careful. And I think the best way for me to talk about that is a pair of metaphors. So I said earlier, I'm a rock climber. And whenever you climb whenever you're working with a climbing partner, someone who's going to hold the rope, someone who's belaying you and keeping you safe so that when you slip off the rock, you don't fall 100 feet. Whenever you're talking with them, whenever you're working with them, we have this whole thing we do. And I remember when I first started doing it with my friend Dave Dietrich, and I put on my harness, he puts on his harness, we set up the whole rope system, and once it's all set up, I check him and he checks me. So I remember the point where I'd been climbing for a week and Dave had been climbing for 20 years. And so it felt a little awkward to me to be checking his harness and to be checking to make sure that he'd done everything right. And what he said to me is this is the culture of climbing. This is what we do, because if we don't, one of us is going to get hurt. So even though he's been doing it for 20 years, we still check him. And that's the way I think of it inside of our own company. It's not just about, it's not just about the people who are above you or what have you. We all check each other, keep each other safe. You do that same thing for your client. You help your client understand what they need to do so that they don't end up in hot water. And you don't end up in hot water. You don't end up saying, well, it wasn't my fault, but now the organization has a bad taste in their mouth. And so that's one of the really big important things for me to say here are communication and planning, and then more communication, doing it in writing, doing it with more people, not less, is really, really important. And that's honestly where I want to end on. I'm happy to take questions.
Right, there we go. I'll ask one real quick. You talked about the climbing analogy, and I spent a lot of time thinking about what it was like 10, 15 years ago when we were doing this. And honestly, I feel in a lot of ways, the way physical penetration testing was, or even just regular pen testing, it was closer to free solo. I don't think that we had a lot of the contractual things in place that we should have had in place, because, let's be honest, Jay, you go back that far, many people in the industry thought we were basically criminals, or just one shade away from criminals from what we were doing. And at that time, a lot of us were transitioning into becoming more professional in what we did, maybe moving from more gray hat to white hat. So what are some big differences that you see now? I guess if you could go back in time and talk to Jay Beale, Mike Poor, Ed Scotus, Hillary, and Jimmy, when you guys started this, if you could go back in a time machine and give one piece of advice about keeping your company safe, what would that be?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think it would be, I think one would be, whoa, gosh, so I've talked about communicate, so I'm going to leave that one alone, but it would certainly be the communicate, check. In the physical pen testing, it's kind of like go and make sure that your client owns the building. Jake talked about that a bunch, but honestly, we've had conversations in our industry where it's like, no, it's the client's responsibility to tell us whether they own the building. It's like, do you understand that if we break into a building and we're not allowed to, or I'm going to switch metaphors here. I'm going to switch examples right here. If we hack an IP address, and when we break into that IP address, what we find, when we break into the computer on that IP address, we find it doesn't belong to the company that paid us. That we may have a civil suit against the company that paid us, but the criminal case is going to involve us. And so for me, I think that's probably the, knock on wood, we've been very lucky. But if you were to talk to any business owner in the penetration testing space, very much off the record, I'm sure they would tell you that at some point they have access to computer that their client told them to, and their client was in error about whether they owned it or not. So I think for me, the field is a lot more mature nowadays. Like we really do check. Like it's just part of, I think it's part of what the more mature firms do. I think it's honestly what the new firms have learned to do by going to training. in their training, because we've all, everyone's had those nightmare scenarios where it's like, boss, yeah, that's not the client. That's somebody on the same ISP as them, but their address range was clearly smaller than they told us it was.
Yeah. And that happens.
It's happened to everybody. I would never say that it happened to us, but it's we must be the only company it's never happened to.
Yep, ever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has happened to us. I like telling the story because I think it kind of articulates just how things can go sideways. It's funny, years ago when I first started and started BHIS, we were testing a casino in Vegas, and they said, here's our IP range, the addresses of all of our computers, and it was a /24. And we went back and we checked with the ISP. Their ISP gave us the paperwork and said, yes, they own that range. Everything checked out. So we started attacking that range. We gained access to a NAS server. And once we got access to the NAS server, it was a completely different casino.
Oh, yep.
And I went back to our customer and I'm like, what is going on here? This is bad. I'm pretty sure I just broke multiple laws. And they said, oh, we forgot to tell you, we lease space out on our IP range to other casinos. Could you just break in and tell us which one of those IP addresses are ours and which ones are not? And it's like, no, that's literally I can go to prison for that. No, it's cool. It's like, just because you say something's cool doesn't make it okay. So then luckily, I think, Jay, one of the things that's nice for like our firms is we're known in the industry. And a lot of times, even if something like that does happen, we have a Rolodex that's deep enough that we can call the security person at that company and say, I'm doing a pen test for X. I broke into your company. We need to hash this out as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
all right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jay. We've got Deviant online. Feel free to stick around and watch the rest of the presentations. But everybody, a round of applause for Jay Beale and Inguardians.
Thanks a lot.